Another Sales Wisdom podcast with Sue Barrett. That could also be a CEO is a pod because Sue is the CEO at Barrett Consulting Group. Today, we're going to philosophize. We're going to talk about equality, climate actions, sales, women in sales, women empowerment, and yeah, bringing moral back into employee engagement and so forth. Sue, can you introduce yourself and tell us a bit more about your businesses and what you're up to nowadays?
Sure. My name is Sue Barrett. I started Barrett Consulting Group on the 9th of January 1995 with the express purpose of putting humanity back on the corporate map and understanding what good selling actually looks like. I actually have a science degree by background in medical science subjects. So I'm kind of really curious, sort of nerdy kind of creature, and I like unpacking and understanding how things work. And my first sales role was really in my father's timber business. I grew up in a family-run business, 120 people he employed, and it was wholesale timber and hardware. And I remember being allowed to go to work with him when I was about 14. And I was working in a hardware store, dealing with customers. And I just asked him, what should I do? And he said, you just help people. You just find out what they need and you help them. And so that's where, I didn't know at the time, that's where my sales career started. And I do remember, this is back a number of years ago now, that these builders would come in and they take one look at me and they do this great big circle around me and kind of avoid me. And I'm going, what's going on? Why are they avoiding me? And I went up to my dad again and said, what should I do? He says, just be persistent. Just go up to them and find out what you can help them with. So I thought, okay, challenge accepted. So I went straight up to these people as they would come in so they couldn't avoid me. And I'd say, look, hi, my name is Sue. Tell me what you're looking for and I'll find the right person to help you. Because, I was 14, I was young, I didn't have a lot of knowledge and they couldn't avoid me. So they would tell me what they needed and then I'd either find the right person or guess what? I could help them. So I just, like solving puzzles. I like helping people and that's how I started. But of course, I was, didn't realize back then that they were avoiding me because I was a young woman, a young girl, and what would I know? But I like learning and I started studying all these sorts of things and I became very handy and useful to these people. And I used to basically work in the school holidays. Finished my school, went to university, and then I fell into the pharmaceutical industry as a salesperson. I was the youngest person apparently in Australia at the time. I was 21, and that's where I learned how not to sell, because they basically taught us how to show up and throw out product information in front of doctors. And I felt really strange. It was against what I had been taught by my dad. So long story short, I hated selling. I left that industry and I fell into the recruitment industry. Ironically, I ended up recruiting salespeople and sales managers. But in the recruitment industry, you also had to run your own business. It was like my apprenticeship for actually running my own business. You had to run the book and so on and so forth. And I worked in that industry for about 8 years and I interviewed over 8,000 people face-to-face, about an hour each in sales and sales leadership roles. And so my brain, this sort of pattern-oriented brain that I have, this problem-solving puzzle brain, started actually seeing what good selling looked like. I had no way to map it at the time. And funnily enough, my best placements were people not from the industry. What I was doing was picking up all sorts of qualities and capabilities and, because of course the managers had asked for industry experience, number one. And then I'd have to say to them, kind of in some sort of, trust me mode, I've found someone, they're amazing, you have to meet them. And a number of managers, said, okay, Sue, yeah, fair enough. And they would go, oh my God, they are amazing. And they became some of the best salespeople. And so what I discovered was that industries can be at risk of going backwards if they just keep, moving people from company to company in the same ecosystem. And so what I was doing is refreshing the gene pool by bringing in, new people from outside and picking up ideas and patterns. Anyway, all of that kind of in a short space of time, I learned how to run a business and I started my own business. And so I'm very keen looking at sales systems, strategy, process, people, culture, human-centered ethical ways of selling. And essentially I've been helping organizations and people sell better for all the right reasons. So that hopefully gives you a bit of a nutshell, a bit in a nutshell where I've come from and how I kind of view the world.
Good intro for sure. You're lucky because your dad taught you this at 14. My dad's also an entrepreneur, learned stunts from him, so I would have questions about that. But first, my intro to sales, and I guess it's been a lot of salespeople's intro to sales. It was certainly yours in the pharma world. It was this kind of Wolf of Wall Street style of selling, sell me this pen. There's no value to this pen whatsoever for you, but I'm still gonna have you buy it because I'm good at cheating you, kind of. I started with this style in my 20s and kind of roll with these styles for a couple of years until I founded my own businesses, and I understood that this wasn't scalable, and moreover, it wasn't the person I was seeking to be. I was this type of guy to think further than business and just money, and also think of myself as a human being, who I wanted to be, the values that I embodied, and so forth. And I do think that most people do not have this kind of consciousness. I've always been big on spirituality, mindset, and an independent thinker. So my first question, because I had a couple coming off of that. First, it seems that this type of selling and, the pharma industry, we've seen the Purdue Pharma scandal and all of that. It seems somewhat that it's widespread out there, this style of selling. So it's really toxic for society. But other than talking with Sue and having her drop wisdom on you and understand that sales is not just sales, how can a young salesperson understand that selling is not just selling and that there's ethics in the mix? How can we educate them?
Yeah, I look, absolutely. That Purdue example is just horrific. And okay, let's step back and let's use a bit of science and biology to understand that humans are actually born curious, helpful, and they work for fairness. We're pro-social and we do want to get along with each other. And trust is at the epicenter of that. If we can't trust someone, we can't have healthy relationships with them. So if you just look at that as a base foundation for our existence, then you build on that. A lot of people, like to be helpful. They want to sort things out for people. But when it comes to sales has a proactive nature to it. And sales actually has a need for us, if we do it well, to get out there and engage with people who don't know us initially and to ignite opportunity. There's a high risk of getting rejected. So a lot of people, when they think of selling, the first thing that comes into their mind is, I don't want to sell because I'll get rejected. And that's very anxiety provoking for people, and they haven't learned how to handle that. The other thing that adds to that is the tropes and negative stereotypes about these Wolf of Wall Street kind of salespeople. And they go, ooh, yuck, I don't want to be like that. So selling has this very bad kind of negative stereotype. However, everybody lives by selling something. Everyone has an idea or initiative or something they want to take to someone else. I work with not just salespeople, I work with all sorts of people to help them understand that if you have something, an idea, initiative, whatever it is you have, and you need help with someone else to get it over the line, the first thing you have to do is engage with them and ignite their attention and get them to actually pay attention to what it is that you have. But most people, when they come at someone, they come at it from only their perspective. They don't think about the other person. They don't actually think about, well, where is this person at? How are they likely to receive this? This is a higher order thinking where you've got to actually think about someone else. And whilst we are pro-social, oftentimes we're waiting for our turn to speak. Here, I've got this great idea, just dump it on people. This is what I call, kind of just face palming people with yourself, rather than looking at it from the other perspective. Where are they coming from? What would they like to hear? How could I ignite their interest, and so on and so forth? So we've got a couple of things. Firstly, that people want to help each other, got a good idea, you want to get it out there. But it's not all about you. because your idea won't go anywhere unless you have other people enlisted in this. So you've got to gauge and think about where they're coming from, and you've got to be able to work together like this. Selling, unfortunately, has been sold as a combat sport, where it's something that I'm going to, beat you and beat you down and all that kind of stuff. That is just such a negative stereotype, and it's crap. Whereas the very best salespeople actually are very kind and considerate, they're helpful, and they find ways to collaborate and work together. So I'm on a mission, and I've been on a mission all my life pretty much, to actually demystify what good selling actually is, and actually to provide it as a life skill and capability for everyone. Everyone can learn how to do this. Of course, there'll be some that are naturally better at it than others, just like anything, but everyone can actually learn how to do this and do it well in a way that actually is pro-social, collaborative, and it actually builds things better. It's very human-centered, not this chest beating, big game hunting kind of crap that unfortunately makes for interesting television and news articles because it captures our attention and we're all horrified by it. But that's not what good selling is.
Right. And why is that? Is it testosterone culture in this male dominated planet? Is like, why do we learn that this is the way, because I agree with you that it's EQ based selling that will work the best. It's a servant type of salesperson that will listen to their customers' needs and try to fulfill them their best. Why do you think the chest thumping and who has the highest commission always win? And also, small parentheses I wanted to make, in my own journey, like founding my own companies, I understood I had to back my sales claims with a nice product. I think that can help a lot of people to jump in straight entrepreneurship and to start their own companies and be accountable to sell something but deliver on it. So that was just a small comment. But why do you think it's always a competition? It's always testo driven and alpha male driven in the sales world.
I think, well, I can't talk about, long dark histories and things, but we did do a paper on the history of sales methodologies, and we had a look at it back, nearly 200 years ago. And there's a lot of desperation in some cases. Like if people are actually on the poverty line or things like that, and they can't actually stay in a sort of safer space, they will try to just survive. So you'll have some situations where people have learnt, to swindle people just to get by. Now, some have made, careers out of it, and some have even, run countries now, from swindling and, carrying on with what they do. But I do think if we look in more recent times, the way that capitalism has been structured over the last 40, 50 years has been very much around profit maximization and shareholder return at the expense of everything else. So this might piss some people off, but, the Milton Friedman, capitalist market is actually dying. It's not working, but it's created these incredible kind of, conditions where people just go out to try and, take what they can at the expense of everything else. So you've got different people who've gone into that, who in such a way have created these kind of, hyper masculine, big game hunting, chest beating sort of things, when good business actually has always been about healthy relationships, good supply chains and stuff. So in the last 40 years, if we say, selling has mainly been seen as a man's career, and it's been really promoted as a career in which women could excel. This is actually partly because of what we've just been talking about, that aggressive, always been closing sort of sales stereotype. They've also set up remuneration structures that are very hyper competitive and individualistic. So back in the sort of 70s and 80s, you could get away with selling, a product or a service and stuff like that. And, you could just, but now the world is much more complex and the products can be copied like that. It's much more about value and supply chain and business and having higher order thinking skills. And those remuneration structures that rewarded more transactional volume-based sales, where you could have that very competitive first past the line kind of thing, they don't exist anymore. But the culture of that kind of hyper competitiveness is still hanging around. I've found it very interesting because we work with companies around the world that the American style sales culture does not go down well. That hyper competitive American style sales culture doesn't go down well up in other countries. Whilst people try to model it because they think that's how you do it, our research and the work that we have done is this far more human-centered collaborative approach to good sales is what people prefer. They don't like that sort of aggressive style, combat sport scenario. People just go away. It's just awful. So look, it's really hard to say and pinpoint exactly where it came from, but I think there's a number of conditions that have created it. And, and it's exciting, and people go, woo, how fantastic. But unfortunately, selling has been sold as something that's exploitative, not something that's actually really about creating good stuff. It's been very extractive rather than generative.
Yeah, testosterone, yes, kind of estrogen. I think that both can have beneficial effects. One can accelerate short term, but I do think that, yeah, more long term and medium term thinking is needed there for more capital. The bottom lesson here is that you'll make less money if you oversell and underdeliver someone rather than if you sell them the real thing and really deliver on your promise, and then you can even upsell them later on. You've been a proponent of various social causes. I see you always supported athleticism and an active lifestyle. Can you tell us about that part of your life and what you seek to do socially and in your community nowadays?
Well, I have my dad to thank for being an active sports person. He was a very good golfer, tennis player, squash player. He was always about mastery and always working about how to be better. So that mastery mindset I learned from my dad. And my main sport when I was young, although I played tennis and netball and hockey and that, was swimming. So I swam at a competitive level in Australia, just at state and national level. I didn't make it to Olympics and things like that, but I was one of those kids that was swimming about 40 kilometers a week before and after school, and that teaches you a lot about yourself, and I found I love being active. I love testing myself and challenging myself. So I have done sport all my life, but I also love it as a restorative thing. It's very good at helping me manage feelings and emotions and repair those sorts of things as well. I like to do all sorts of other things as well. So, I'm very much into art and music. And I made sure my children got exposed to all of those sorts of things too, to give them a sort of a rounded out education and experiences and set them up for life. So if they had lots more choices about what they wanted to do, and even if they just wanted to pursue something as a hobby, they had the foundations, like how to read music, for example, and stuff like that. So I've been really lucky as a child that I got given opportunity to try lots of things, because I didn't know what I wanted to be when I grew up. So I just kind of threw myself into stuff. I also know too that in times of high stress, that I never, ever stopped doing my sports, because that's the thing that actually, allowed me to keep moving forward through those sorts of things. So when I finished school and I did my science degree, like I said, I just kind of threw myself in to try and find out what to do. And I've always been very socially justice minded as well. You'll note that, from a very young age, I was always about fairness. And I went to a boys' school that turned co-ed in my high school years. So when I went to that school, there were 8 boys to 1 girl. Okay, so it was very interesting. It was in the late 70s. It was the height of the women's movement around the world. And I was lucky that I was a good swimmer, because I was very strong, because it was tough, and I learned how to actually hold my ground. I learned how to, be able to hold a good argument. It wasn't easy, because, there were lots of nice young guys there too, but there were some pretty horrible ones as well. And, I had to defend myself from time to time physically, because you'd get harassed by these people. And I remember my dad, who was very much a pacifist, right? He just didn't like violence at all, but he had 3 daughters and he was really worried what would happen to us if we ever got physically, accosted or assaulted. So he taught me, he said, Sue, if ever you have to punch someone, make sure you keep your thumb outside your fist. So when you hit them, you don't break your thumb. I always remember that. It's ridiculous, isn't it? I had to hit a few boys to, just tell them to back off. But it's just something in me that when my principal at the school, I was captain of swimming, I was a prefect at the school, and he wrote in a final report about me, he said, amongst other things, Sue will not be bullied or tyrannized by prevailing views and attitudes. Which, so I would always stand up for myself, and I'd always say, what's this argument? Why are we doing this? This is not fair. So in terms of speaking up and stepping out, I've always done that, but I've been really grateful for being really physically fit as a woman, because I've had to talk or fight my way out of some difficult situations, to be honest, mostly talk, but occasionally fight. And I'm not happy about that, because why should we? But, this is what happens. So in terms of channeling my efforts and energies in the latter part of my life, I started to actually become involved with social movements. So just to give you an example of a few of them, because there's always been about equality and fairness for women, and always been about, good business and fair business, even though the prevailing paradigms may not have been like that, as we discussed earlier. But I've always stood by that. And I remember back in early 2020, I don't know if you remember or could even paying attention, but Australia was literally going up in flames and burning. Like we had terrible, like they have in Canada at the moment.
It's Canada,
terrible it's terrible bushfires. I've always been about climate action. I've always been about that, trying to do all sorts of things there. But this was just like, oh my God, Australia is going up in flames. And there was so much frustration. And at the time we had a federal government that really just did not care one bit. For the last, sort of several years, we'd had this federal government, and they were climate deniers and so on and so forth. So through Twitter, a number of us, were just like tearing our hair out. What can we do? And later in 2020, one of my friends, we were talking about how could we change how politics is done? How could we, shift the dial on things like that? Because we have a sort of a main 2-party preferred system here. There's some minor parties, the Greens and things like that. And in late 2020, a bunch of concerned citizens in the federal electorate that I live in of Goldstein, we got together via Zoom, because of course we're all in COVID lockdown by then. And we said, why don't we have a think about, putting up a quality community-backed independent candidate for our seat at the next federal election, which was going to happen either in late 2021 or into 2022. Because there'd already been a couple of models that had happened. So a couple of electorates, we have 151 federal electorates around the country, and a couple of electorates had actually already started putting in community-backed independent candidates. And so we said, let's see if we can do one for Goldstein. So where I live is in Melbourne, Australia, and Goldstein is on the bay, and it's a reasonably wealthy electorate. There's a variety of people there, but it has on the bay sort of the wealthiest suburbs in Australia. So it's quite privileged. But there's other parts of it too that aren't as privileged, but it's probably quite middle class to privileged. And of course, there's a tendency for that privileged group to vote for the conservative side of politics. So, we were thinking, okay, what shall we do? So we started a group called Voices of Goldstein, and in late 2020, and we started to create messaging. And this is where I used my work in sales. Want to have a very good value proposition, very clear messaging, set up a structure, make sure that we actually had activities and we were highly visible. Now, even with COVID lockdown, we could go and do little community democracy walks. We made sure we had T-shirts made and all that kind of stuff. So we started using social media, getting out in community and just talking to people about, representative democracy. It was amazing. People started flocking to us because there are a lot of people, a lot of individuals who were really frustrated with the lack of action, worried about climate, worried about inequality and so on. So the fact that we actually showed them, hello, here we are, good sales practice, hello, we're in the streets, here we are, they started to come to us. So we built this amazing community, and we then consulted with them. And we said, okay, what's top of mind for you? What's really important? Climate action, integrity, equality, and prosperity, mutual prosperity. They were the four, if you like, became the four policy pillars. And then we said, would you be prepared to back a community-backed independent candidate if we found one? And they all went, yes. And at this stage, we had about 400 people. And the electorates are about 110,000 people, so I've got 400 people. And we thought, how could we mobilize 400 people? And so we consulted again, what would a good candidate look like? What do you want? And so on and so forth. And then I became chair of the selection panel. And then we went out to market to find someone. So my recruitment background came in handy. And we had 14 self-nominations. And then this amazing person got introduced to me. And her name is Zoe Daniel. And she actually was a foreign correspondent for our public broadcaster, the ABC. Highly credentialed, highly revered. And she actually had just come back and had resigned from the ABC, having spent 4 years in Washington as our bureau chief, obviously reporting on the Trump years. Okay. So she got introduced to me in the July of 2021, and she said no. And I said, fair enough, it's a pretty tough, gig. I said, but Zoe, you're a journalist. Do you mind if I stay in touch just to keep you informed of what we're doing? Because I thought if we could get her over the line, oh my God, it would be incredible. So I deployed my very best strategic key account management skills, and I stayed in touch with her. And then in late October, we were getting to the pointy end because we didn't know when the election would be called. We don't have set times like they do in other countries. And I reached out to her again one last time. I said, Zoe, look, we're at this point. I need to know, are you in or you're not? And she went, I'm in. And so she actually came on board, and we put her through the recruitment process. And then she turned the tables on me and she said, would you be my campaign manager? And I've gone, what? I've never run a political campaign in my life. And then I thought about it. I thought a political campaign is an on-the-ground human-to-human sales-led campaign. And I'm really good at doing that with organizations. Surely I could deploy some of my capabilities and do that. So we basically started this campaign. We ended up, it was a 7-month-long campaign. The election was on the 22nd of May, 2022. We were going up against, very seasoned and quite, entrenched sort of mindsets and things like that. But we made sure we offered a very sensible centre candidate, because the people on the conservative side would never vote for the more progressives, and the progressives would see Zoe as more of a strategic move. So nice, sensible centre. And because good strategy is what you leave out. So you're not trying to convince everyone in the electorate. You're going to go after a particular area and you prosecute that. So like I said, we used all of these sorts of things. We managed to get over 1,000 active volunteers out there. And I told everyone who joined the campaign, your number one job is T-shirts on, conversations had. And we taught everyone how to have amazing, very human-centered conversations where we would listen and understand what was important to them, and then offer up Zoe as a choice, as a viable choice. Anyway, the great news is that we won. And so you can imagine telling the board and CEO that you take a product that no one knows about, and in 6 months it's going to be market leader. They'd all laugh you out of the boardroom, right? But we did that, but not just us. 5 other electorates around the country also did that too, in addition to the other ones that already had been in place. So we've started this wave, this motion, but we made sure the whole thing was really disciplined and well run. So that's an example of taking, here's the other thing. I've got to tell you this because your listeners will find this fascinating. Remember how most people don't like sales because they're frightened of contacting people and they feel like, what if I'm rejected? Well, we taught everyone how to do door knocking, which has to be one of the most challenging prospecting views of the universe, right? So we taught them all how to do door knocking and how to open conversations. We door knocked over 44,000 homes in the electorate. And I have people coming up to me who've never been in sales in their life going, oh my God, Sue, this was so amazing. I can't believe I did things I never thought I could do. And I love door knocking. I mean, who would have thought? Who would have thought that people would have had that experience? So that's an example of where I've taken what I've learned about good sales, good strategy, good human engagement, and mobilized it to actually, not just me, I mean, but mobilize that to actually drive change in democracy and help us get better representative democracy. So sorry, it's a bit of a long story, but I'm just sharing it with you.
No, it's really inspiring. I know like what to tell my daughters now. So thank you so much for all the insights you've added today. Where can people find out more about you, Sue?
They can go to barrett.com.au. That's barrett.com.au. And if they're interested in women and sales, I also have a website called selllikeawoman.com. So they can go there as well. But thank you so much for the opportunity to talk about these things.